Welcome to On Layered, the show where we talk about next generation blockchains. I'm your host, Dave, and this week we are joined by Fredrik Ahlgren from Sourceful. Sourceful is trying to create a decentralized power grid. And Fredrik, interesting character. He actually comes from academia, from Linnaeus University, where he was heading up an IoT lab, and has since moved over to start up this startup focusing on renewable energy and DePIN. So really interesting. And actually just a bit of background about why we're doing this episode, but I was speaking with Logan Jastrzemski on a recent podcast. And I, when talking about DePIN, I asked about the energy side of it, because it's not something which I've really come across too much or heard too much about on the timeline. So I was keen to get Fredrik on and talk us through the industry. So Fredrik, thanks for joining us, and how are you doing today?
All good. Thank you very much for inviting me. Nice to be here. So, and also super happy that you cover, I would say, from my perspective, the most interesting part of crypto at the moment. So, but everyone is biased. So,
for sure. I mean, I was saying to you just before we came on air, but I think at the moment, if you listen to all of the VCs, they're only interested in AI and DePIN at the moment. So you're definitely in sort of the right market at the right time, I think. But I mean, so firstly, do you want to just talk us through how you've made the move over from academia into founding your first crypto startup?
Yeah. So for once, it's not my first startup. It's actually my third in the same sector. So I've been like in the DePIN space, but still, the way in for me, I think resonates with a lot of people that have done any kind of DePIN crypto startup. It all started with Helium. And that was the same case for me. And you hear this story a lot. So I've seen other people speak about like, oh, I'm inspired by Helium. That's where it all started. And I am no different. I started, I would say, like I've been in crypto. I mean, as an amateur, I did some Ethereum mining back in 2017, built my own rig and just for fun, never made too much about it. But Helium, and I would say that the growth they had when they built their project 2021 was something exceptional. And I think this is what inspires, I would say, all or most of the DePIN projects today. They managed to get to, we're talking about thousands of hotspots to 1 million hotspots, and we're talking about a timeline of a year or so. Don't ask me about exactly the months or so, I don't remember, but we're talking about that kind of growth. Well, there were no Raspberry Pis available, and people were overpaying a lot for hardware, and the secondhand market was crazy. And so I built the first IoT network in the south part of Sweden. We built with Helium gateways, and then everything crashed. This was, I think, 2022, about mid of that.
Yeah.
We went to the drawing board, me and a couple of colleagues. When we started this journey, we actually brought on more people. So we were a group of like 3 or 4 people that were like inspired by this and were climbing ladders and so. But we thought, okay, what can we do with this kind of power? Like the power of building something that no one at that time, and most likely still, don't know what IoT is. It's like a buzzword. It's like talking about machine learning or whatever, but IoT might even be more abstract because we're talking about smart cities and sensors and and still they got people that never heard about IoT. They learned about how to install your antenna at the best position. They climbed ladders. They put up thousands of dollars up front for hardware, which might come months later. and all this happened just because of a token. And we thought, what could we do with this power? It's still like a speculative power. People are doing it sort of the same way where like you couldn't get hand of a GPU in 2017. That's like the same thing with in the beginning of Ethereum mining and so on. But then when we're talking about mining like Bitcoin and Ethereum, or like I think we could stop there because I think then you're doing proof of work for the network. But the DePIN is different because you're actually building the infrastructure for something else. So, and that's the cool thing, I think, that you can actually combine the power of being early, the early adopter, and having a stake in the vision, but still building something that actually can be useful in the world. And let's not go in and talk about Bitcoin or Ethereum not being useful. That's not at all what I'm saying. I believe they are, but still they are for its own sake, rather than I would say a token that actually creates a wireless network or an energy network, as we're going to dive deeper into, or a network of connected cars or such. So I think this was the when we started on the drawing board, we looked, can we do this with some kind of other sector? And we eyed the energy sector. I have a background also in energy engineering. So recently I worked at a computer science department, but before that I actually did my PhD in energy efficiency, and like were more closer to thermodynamics and those kind of things than computer science. So energy was close. We had some contacts also at the energy company, the local energy company. And we saw this trend of like, there is so much things happening now in the world with renewable power. Could we in any way give a token reward for people that installs solar PV? That was sort of the base idea. We didn't know how to have, like, what's the demand side? Like, we had no idea in the beginning. Let's do something. Let's give a token for people that are building out solar PV. So that's where we started. Let's reward people for producing renewable power. And that simple idea started with like, okay, we need a gateway. We need to verify that this production is actually renewables. How can we do that? Which blockchain should we work with? At this point, Helium actually had their own blockchain, and we didn't want to build our own blockchain. So we ended up like, Solana might be a good choice.
That's interesting. When was that?
Sounds like a story that I made up after, but we were actually on Solana before Helium. So.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying about DePIN. As you say, obviously Bitcoin and Ethereum are not wasted work per se, but it's long been a sort of a hope, if you like, of the crypto community that all of the energy that's being spent on mining could actually be spent on something more practical in the real world, or more tangible, if you like. And so I completely agree that DePIN is that sort of breakthrough. I think with energy, just to sort of maybe wind back a little bit about your thesis, I suppose, can we just go into what is wrong with the current status quo of renewable energy? I mean, people have solar panels on their roof. They can use that electricity themselves. They can sell it to the grid, as I understand. So sort of what are the issues at the moment? What are the roadblocks? Why do we need a solution?
Yeah. So this is a very good starting point. And we can actually let's not speak about crypto at all for a moment. And then we just focus on, I would say, the first principle engineering problems of the energy systems in the world today. And if we start from how we have built our energy system, and when I now speak about energy, just to be clear, I'm talking about electricity. So energy could also be fossil fuels, the natural gas, and so on. But we're now focusing on electricity.
Yeah.
So and the systems that we have today are generally built as you have big centralized power plants. Could be coal power plants, could be hydro, it could be nuclear, it could be wind farms that are still like in one place. But these are all centralized, and then you have the end user, that's you as the homeowner, or the factory, or whatever is out in the grid, that are the consumers. And this is, I think, this is like maybe the most important thesis to have in the back of your head. Like, we have producers and we have consumers. Obviously, the grid can transport, like, I would say the wires doesn't care if the electricity goes in one way or the other. Like it's not one-way streets.
Yeah.
But there is like there is still like things that happen when you start to shift this production and consumer. Is that when you start to produce power in the end nodes of the system. So you could have a suburban area. People are beginning to install rooftop solar. For once, when sun is shining, they usually maybe used power. Now they are producing power. So, and if there are too many solar PV panels in a small suburban area, the grid cannot manage. Like they might be producing much more that needs to go back into the grid than they usually actually consumed. So this is like one factor. The other factor is that the more power that is produced in the end nodes, like the decentralized part, like you, Dave, or me, could have rooftop solar PV. Like that's great. But the grid always needs to be in balance. And this is something that you might, like as a normal person, you might never think about this. And why should you? But there is this simple fact. Electricity in the grid isn't stored. Everything is instant. That means that if you cook your tea water in the morning, you put that, if you obviously use an electric heater, I'm talking from someone from the UK, so I know that you have a lot of gas then. But anyhow, at the same time, you're actually turning on your heater. Maybe it's 2 kilowatts of power or something like that.
Yeah.
Somewhere else in the grid, something else needs to produce that 2 kilowatts of power at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a little bit simplified. It's not like there is a crisis meeting at the power plant and like David's starting his boiler now and let's start an extra 2 kilowatts. The grid is vast and it's actually you have a sort of it goes slow, so it won't happen too much with 2 kilowatts. What will happen is that even so slightly, the frequency of the grid will drop a little bit. So the frequency of the grid is 50 hertz in Europe and 60 hertz in the US. But that's the indicator of, I would say, the balance in the grid. You have other indicators as well, like voltage and such, depending on how much power you produce or use in certain parts. But the frequency is a very, very good indicator. So what will happen is the frequency will drop just so slightly. And like a 2 kilowatt boiler wouldn't matter too much in this in the full grid. But the point here, somewhere, it will matter. And something in the grid needs to ramp up and actually produce an extra 2 kilowatts. This is just a simplified version, but it's still like this is simple but still true. Like for a small consumer, you might do whatever you like because you will be like minuscule in the terms of bigger schemes. But let's say that we start to do this on a bigger scale. Like we have thousands or tens of thousands of decentralized power production. Everything still needs to be in balance. But if homeowners are not just consumers, they are also producers. And we still need to keep everything in balance. It's actually a smaller and smaller part for the power plants to sort of keep that balance. And the point here is that you as a homeowner, you don't care. You sell your electricity to the grid. When you want your tea, you will press a button and you will cook tea. You don't think too much about, should I do this now or should I like not do it because of the balance of the grid? Obviously, we just want this to work. And the problem is like the end problem will be for the electricity, the grid operators and the utilities. These are the ones that like have the problem. You will be really angry at them if there is a blackout. It's that simple. I wouldn't like say that it's my neighbor's fault. I would say that it's the utility's fault. That's where I would point. And it is their fault. Even though if like actually your neighbor might be be the reason if you have too many So what we need to do is to build the coordination layer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very simple. Like actually, if the power plants
because at the moment there's just not this coordination layer to get people incentivized. Is it incentivized to sell power back to the grid? Is that the issue here? Because people do have solar panels on their roof.
This is different in different regions. Like when we look at like selling excess power back to the grid, mm-hmm. yes, that's a thing in, I would say, most parts of Europe. It's not a problem at all. But mm-hmm. If you live in Australia, you might not be able to do it. You might not. You might be able to use it for your own use, or you need mm-hmm. a battery. In the UK, it's totally possible, and you also get extra incentives. You might get like renewable certificates and such, mm-hmm. and get like a tax subsidize and so. But point here is that this is different. Often you can sell your excess power back to the grid, mm-hmm. and sometimes not. But still, you like if you are selling or not selling, if that isn't communicated and coordinated. Mm-hmm. We have a big power plant, which is all the rooftop solar PV, mm-hmm. that isn't controlled. Like it's that simple. It's like let's start this energy producing machine. Great. It goes on when the sun shines and it goes off when the sun is going down. Mm-hmm. Somewhere between these times, we have no control of it. It's not like it will just be running, and we can't like tune it up or down. Mm-hmm. That's not a very good machine, because we need to at least be able to have a throttle that we can throttle it if we get too much. And that's because we can't just have too much power. It needs to be a balance. Mm-hmm. We can do this in many different ways. The grid operator utilities, they could install big battery parks, mm-hmm. where they could actually feed in the excess power. We could have hydropower, where we pump water up to like a higher level. That's common in Switzerland and so, if you have high mountains. So there's loads of ways you can do it. Mm-hmm. You could have a Bitcoin mining farm that like ramps up and goes a little bit extra hard or goes down. So there's loads of ways you could do it. So that's maybe one of the answers to your previous what can we do, what is useful with like Bitcoin mining. Mm-hmm. This is actually a useful thing, I believe, even though you're just burning or like wasting and creating heat of electricity. But still, wouldn't it be quite good if we also could just coordinate these resources? That's actually a very, very strong incentive already built into the system. There is already markets for this. This is the cool thing. That how I can take an example, and mm-hmm. there are probably numerous examples in each and every country, but I'm from Sweden, so I know like a Swedish example. And I can take that one. We have a power plant in southeast of Sweden called Karlshamnsverket. And in Sweden, we have about 99% or plus of renewable power. That is if you count nuclear, but still. Mm-hmm. But I would say we don't create too much CO2. That's the point when we have electricity. But there is one power plant still like in operation. It's oil powered, like actually like this thick black oil that is powering like the I would say the ocean ships that are still operating with this. So it's like crude oil. Yeah. And the thing is that this power plant is operating. They have personnel there 24/7 all year round. Mm-hmm. But they might be operating just a few hours every year. And then you might ask yourself, like, how could this be profitable? I mean, how could they ever like pay salaries and wages for having technicians sitting on their asses all day around, all year around? Mm-hmm. It's one reason, because we might need that power. We might need it because we don't want to have a blackout. It's that simple. And the more renewables we get in the system, the more we need these insurance power plants. So there is markets already for this. The markets are called demand and response markets. They are also called ancillary services. So you could actually call yourself like a part of an insurance company for the grid. That's another way of seeing it. And that is what we are doing with that. That's, I would say, the core business of what we're building at Sourceful. And it's also called a virtual power plant, a VPP. So many names, and I would say the most common name for a consumer-friendly, like if a company tries to sell that we're building a VPP, that's probably the way they're saying it, a virtual power plant.
And so then to go into the actual, maybe the DePIN dynamics which are going on here. So obviously, typical DePIN model, you are giving tokens out to the early providers within this network. So is the thing that they're providing is power to this specific, as you said, virtual power plant? Or is there batteries as well going on? Do you want to just talk us through what actions you're trying to seek from this DePIN project?
Yeah. So I would say that we have like a strategy and we have a roadmap. So let's start with like the big vision. We want to connect as many distributed energy resources as possible. That's what we want. So we're not saying that only solar, only batteries. It could be loads of things. It could be EV chargers, charging boxes. I have gotten this question before, but yes, it could be a Bitcoin miner. But whatever that is, I would say controllable. And it doesn't even need to be something that is producing power, because from the grid perspective, and I mean, might be like complicating things now, but from the story before, when I said that if you turn on your like kettle heater and you're cooking tea, if that is 2 kilowatts of power, you could either ramp up an extra 2 kilowatts on the power plant, or your neighbor might be just finishing his kettle and turning that off at the same moment you start yours. From the grid perspective, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there is new power produced or actually something that is decreased, because it's all about balance. So that's would say one perspective that is quite good to have in mind. So that means that we aim to connect as many decentralized energy resources as possible. And an abbreviation for this is DERS. So that's a good way. You know that you've heard it here, and next time you see it, you will know what it is. But that's actually including anything that is controllable on the grid. If you're going to make the broad, could even be an HVAC or so as well. And the DePIN approach here is that it's no companies at this point that are including small resources. Because the simple story here is that, there is a market, yes. So there is $1 billion market for having controlled assets on the grid. Great, you might think. Okay, but the cost of controlling them and connecting them and coordinating them, it's the same cost for a utility company to connect their big solar farm as it is with a single homeowner. Because from the technology perspective, the only thing that needs to happen is like a small Linux computer or some kind of small computer that can send control signals to the inverter or the battery, like throttle down, throttle up, like that's what we're talking about. So, I mean, the same computer could essentially control a nuclear power plant and one solar panel. You would still need like some kind of control logic in the end. And this is, I would say, this is probably one of the reasons why the DePIN approach might or maybe is even necessary when we're going to reach all the small resources. And I take this as an example. There are no companies today that are doing this, not that I know of. If you look at what is happening in the Nordic countries, we've had like a big peak now. It's a little bit on the downturn now, but with batteries. So, and there are companies installing these control computers, if you say so, but small Linux computers in people's homes when they are participating in the VPP market. Exactly what I'm talking about now. So if you ever had a 10 kilowatt or more of like a battery, batteries are fantastic because they operate 24/7, not only when the sun is shining, and you can not only push power to the grid, you can also draw power from the grid. So like much more valuable than a solar PV installation, like batteries are great.
Yeah.
But so these are, I would say, there are companies working with batteries, and that's because they are much more valuable. But it's the same kind of computer, same kind of work to install for people that just have solar.
Mm-hmm.
And when these traditional companies, because it's always kind of fun and look at like, because you can find all these analogies with helium as well and the traditional, I would say, telco sector.
Yeah.
But how do a utility company or a company in the traditional electricity sector do when they want to install something in people's homes? They have a distributed network. They have often like a rugged Linux computer that maybe cost $1,000,
Mm-hmm.
and they send home an installer. They don't have a good UX experience with an app. You need to call some kind of distributor. Often the companies are only operating B2B, and there is like a local electrician that have some kind of cash kickback when they install these kind of devices.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, we're talking about thousands of dollars probably per household in some kind of indirect or direct costs.
Mm-hmm.
And like we've seen the same thing, like how does a company that wants to build an IoT network do if they're going to do this the traditional way? They need salespeople, they need technicians, they need to have contracts with people that have sites. And well, it's very, very costly. Instead, you just let people buy their own miner and install their own antenna on their house or whatever. And the same thing we're trying to do. So the gateway that we are working with is in, I would say, many ways the same thing as a helium miner. Mm-hmm. We are actually cooperating with Rock Wireless as they have been early into helium. The point here is that the homeowner will buy the gateway themselves. It's about 10th of the price of equivalent hardware. So as I said, there are equivalent hardware, often industrial grade Linux computers, and they are able to install and operate it themselves. So we have an iPhone application, we have like, you link your Solana wallet and you get token rewards. So we don't need to have an economy department that are doing fiat transactions to people all over the world. And yes, that part would be pretty hard to scale as well. And then, so we use the same model. Like if we want to do this on scale, we need to do it more cost competitive. Mm-hmm. And we also need to have the people that are building the network actually get rewards for it. So that's also something that it's harder for a traditional company to do. Like that's one of the unfair advantages of a DePIN is that we can incentivize people with tokens. Mm-hmm. And as we have minted these tokens ourselves, it's not an upfront cost for an investor. And the people could hold these tokens, and perhaps they might be they might have a different value. So I'm on thin ice here. I wouldn't speculate on value or something.
So if we compared maybe the two processes of going through a centralized entity. So a centralized entity would maybe have to pay a lot more of the costs in order to set it up in people's homes. And then that power can be used and then sold back to the grid, and they would receive presumably like the fiat revenue, if you like, from that. Through your system, the homeowners themselves are the ones who are basically fronting the hardware costs. They're doing the installation themselves, thereby massively reducing your costs compared to a centralized entity, just like how Helium does with telco. So in terms of what they're receiving under your model, is it going to be the case they would still receive that fiat revenue for selling their energy to the grid, and on top of that, they receive tokens from your DePIN distribution?
Yes,
to
totally correct. Totally correct. Yeah. So I would say phase one, which we will be for at least the next year or so, we will not do peer-to-peer energy trading. Mm-hmm. So we will not be the ones that are, I would say, buying the energy back from the grid. You will still do that in the same way that you're already doing. Mm-hmm. And this is just a way to unlock a new way to earn on your solar PV.
Yeah.
And I like a demo is one of the projects I often also talk about. And we're actually borrowing a lot of their tokenomics into our model as well. But you already have a car, and just by sharing your data, you earn more. And you could say that, you already have solar panels, you already have batteries. Just by sharing your data, because we will be able to monetize on just the data itself, you will get tokens. So that's a very simple thing. You don't even need to give up anything. And if you also want to operate in the VPP, you will earn even more. But that will always be an opt-in thing. Yeah. I believe everyone will opt in, because it would be stupid not to, because you would earn more. But the control part is obviously something that you actually need to be, you as a user need to be very aware that there is another entity that is controlling my devices. So reading data is one thing, but the control part is.
And can you just clarify how you monetize the data? Maybe you've said it, but can you just spell it out?
Yeah, so from the data part, and this is something that comes with, this is actually a quite interesting part, because the vision that we have is to build the world's largest VPP. That's the vision that we have, and that's the, I would say, on the roadmap. On the path to build a VPP, one of the by effects that we will have is data. You wouldn't be able to build a VPP if you don't capture the data from the devices. But VPP is important. You need to be able to control to have a VPP. You can't do it just by reading the data. So the data is, you are able to monetize on the data, and the pricing models as it looks now, and this we have done some research in, we're talking about €1 per month and DER. That's what the utilities today are paying for just access to the data. And this is, you might wonder, why would they ever care? They care because these are things that happen in, I would say, their grid. And also, don't they already know? No, they don't. They know what happens on, I would say, your side of the utility meter. They don't know. It's sort of, you might be producing 10 kilowatts of solar PV. You might also be charging your car at the same time with 10 kilowatts. The utility provider, they will only see that you're using 0 power at that moment. They could probably have a good idea on actually that this is the scenario, because they know that you have solar. You might be able, I think that you're at least in the Nordic countries required by law to actually say that you're installing solar. But they are still lacking a data point. They don't know. And there is also another side of this story, is that the utility companies are also operating in competition with each other. So if you are a utility company, you are not a software company. That's, I would say, most of the utility companies are not software companies. There are probably some exceptions. I think Fuse Energy, Octopus Energy are a little bit more software engineering based, but most are not. So they are relying on other to build, I would say, the edge in their customer experience. And one edge that is very important is that people, they get an electric car. You also have solar on your roof. You want to have this represented on your invoice. So when you get your invoice from your utility company, you might want that insight on how much power did I actually use for my car versus solar, how much did I produce, and simple things. But you require this. And they are, because there are, I would say, more digital players in the space that are already providing this. In the Nordic, we have 2 companies that, one is called Tibber and one is called Greenly. More digital versions of utility companies, they have an iPhone app and they're digital first and so. And still, every single local energy company that are super traditional, they have a power plant and all that, and they have the local customer base, they need to provide the same kind of services, otherwise they will lose their customer base. So that is the reason why there are a high interest of getting access to this data, because they can use it also to make their products better. long story short, yes, there is a need for the data. You could probably find even more, would say, ways of monetizing this with AI, for instance. And if you have a data center in an area and you want to predict and actually operate that data center most effectively, it would be really good to tap into the data of what is produced and consumed in the near area.
And maybe just to circle off on this sort of tokenomics subject. Obviously, we've discussed how you'll be emitting the tokens to the people who are providing maybe power or batteries to the grid. How is it being spent, this token? Who will be the users in this sort of end vision for Sourceful?
Yeah, so there will be several steps, and I would say not all details are done. So we are in the beta phase now, and we are pre-token generation event. But I would say from the high-level perspective, we are going to use a burn and mint equilibrium model, much as I would say helium, and we're very much inspired by that model. So the demand side, which would be the utility companies, those are the customers. So the grid operators, the utilities, I would say these are the ones that are buying services from the network. That will be fiat money that is being spent. That will burn the token. And that will obviously create a buy pressure because that will be bought from the open market. So that is one way of like rewarding the users with the token. And then we have plans of using the token. So I told you, like in the phase 2 of the system, there is something that is really, really cool that we want to do, and that is peer-to-peer energy trading. I would say it's further down the roadmap, and it's also very much linked to regulatory. Like we might not be able to do it all over the world. We might do it in but then you also obviously would like to use the token in that transaction. So, and then there are also other things that we're working with providers that are already, like companies that are already working with optimization of any kind. So let's say that you have a battery, you have solar, you might have a controllable heat pump, and such. And there is actually a monetary value for you to sort of optimize this based on like the price of the day. Maybe sometimes you should use more power, less power, charge your car at certain times. And we would be able to connect these kind of optimization providers into our platform because we already have the hardware and everything in place. I would say the end user might be using the energy token for, we might be able to, like, part of the tokens might go to these kind of platforms, providers that optimize. So those are the things that we're also in discussion with. So, but yes, it will be a utility token. I think that's quite important. You need to have some kind of utility for a token in a DePIN project.
Yeah,
but there
sure.
could be.
You need, it's the sort of the tap and the sink. You need something to offware it. Otherwise, it's just going to be sort of price going down the whole time and disincentivize the whole project. And you sort of mentioned about different regulatory regimes and things like that, and that got me thinking on that subject as well. I mean, how are you thinking about go-to-market? You're obviously European-based, so is Europe sort of where you're initially going to be focusing and then spreading out? And how do you deal with like the different countries, or is it's all sits under EU, so that's sort of an easy first batch to go for? Yeah, how are you thinking about it all?
Yeah, this is one of, I would say, the big challenges, and also one of the things that we think that we have a pretty good plan for. But I would say, let's start with the supply side. We are going global from day one. So supply side, yes, people will be able to buy the gateway and connector. We're also working with APIs at the moment, just for the growth. So we already have connected sites in actually 14, 15 countries, but we have US, we have Canada, and we have tens of countries in the European Union and Australia, and so not too many in each country, but still. Yeah. So supply side is global, yes. And why this is the case, why we can do this is that we will just give a baseline rewards to the users. So you get smaller rewards, but you're still part of building the network. The demand side and like go to market, because we do need to we do need to have a cash flow for actually being able to have this as a sustainable business. It's that simple. That will be in Europe. And I would say Sweden and the Nordic countries will most likely be the first go-to-market. We are already in partnership with the utility company and have discussions with several others in Sweden. Mm-hmm. You don't need too much actually to be able to have a revenue stream. So we're talking about as little as 10 household batteries. That like if you can lump them together, mm-hmm. yes, you're able to participate as like a unit. So and that the part of that story is that it's in the utilities' interest to make it easy because we are actually solving a problem. We're not competing with the utilities. Mm-hmm. We are providing something of value. I believe Germany and Netherlands, I often like say that this will most likely also be the next countries that we are going to start up the demand side. If this happens in parallel or if we take it in steps, I do not know at the moment. But Germany is most likely the best example ever of a market that is not working as it should just mm-hmm. because of too much solar. You have negative prices. And this is something that if you talk to people in the US, they like never have heard about this, but you have negative pricing. And negative pricing, yes, it actually means that you are getting paid if if you use energy. So which is super strange, but yes, that's true. Yeah, it is like that.
That is crazy. I mean, how can that make sense? Is it to, I don't know, unburden their storage? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, but it's like certain hours a day, obviously, when there is too much high penetration of sun. And the thing here is that if you are producing solar power, you are paying for pushing power to grid. And so like that's the other side of the story. And in the grand scheme of things, there are like two parts of the utility bill when you're paying power. Like one is for the transmission and one is for the actual energy. Mm-hmm. And the transmission costs are still like, it needs to be quite extreme negative prices to actually get paid. So, and that doesn't rarely happen, or I'm not sure if it ever has happened. But still, so you would still like pay transmission costs on your free power. Okay. Yeah. But these are mechanisms which are not at all good for the system. Mm-hmm. And the reason for this is that like the utility companies does not like it. It will just make everything worse for everyone. And why this is because we always want a backup. We want a stable, continuous power. If I flip on my light switch, I want it to be bright. That's simple. We're living in a Western world and we need our electricity 24/7 all year round. And there is like everyone agrees on that. And if there are negative pricing, what is the incentive for a power company to be the backup if they need? They need to push out and pay. So that's not a very good scenario. You're actually making it very hard for making it profitable for these backup systems. And obviously, you as the end consumer will always be the one that pays the bill, because if it's super expensive for them to keep these power plants running, well, they need to add that expense somewhere else, and it will most likely end up in a higher expense in some other place than the actual energy. So that's part of why the transmission costs are getting more expensive, even though the energy is getting cheaper. So,
and maybe just to pivot slightly, but I'd be interested, perhaps for the last quarter, if you like, of this interview, to look at the future of energy and the direction that you think it's going to go, and as well thinking about AI and the disruption that that's going to have. So, I mean, I think the first question, we haven't touched on it at all, but is nuclear going to be forming a very large part, or a much larger part of the energy makeup than it does today? Is it going to be sort of nuclear on these large sites and then solar for this last mile provision? How do you think it's all going to work out?
I can make a prediction which is like, it would probably be most likely wrong. But anyhow, I think that I'm pro-nuclear, so I'm not like against nuclear per se. But I believe that we might not see the rise of nuclear as we would like or think, just because the scale of economics of solar PV and batteries. So my gut feeling, I might be wrong, but we might not see too much more nuclear. If more nuclear is happening, I think it's good, but I think money will just do its thing. I mean, the least capital expensive option, I believe, will win. And at the moment, solar PV is in an extreme acceleration. I think we haven't really grasped the scope of this, but there was an article in The Economist just 2 months ago when they made like a piece on the growth of solar in the world. And yeah, I could probably give you something to put in the show notes, but sure. There is this acceleration trend, like the number of solar installations and added capacity in the world. And it goes like, it's almost like this flat line. And then just in the last year or so, it's straight up. It's not even an S-curve. It's more like an reversed L or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and there are now more money going into solar PV from the investments going into solar PV than all other energy production sources combined. So you could add coal, nuclear, hydro, wind, everything combined. Solar PV is like the singles one that like investments are going into. So I think that if we just see this trend continue, solar is already cheap and it will be dirt cheaper. Batteries the same. We might see a future when we have solar more or less everywhere because it's just going to be cheap. So let's say that you want to install a fence. Yeah, do it, but it might be a solar fence because the solar panels are actually cheaper than the fence. That's already a thing in Netherlands. And then there are like people blogging about it. Like you get 30-year warranty on your solar panels, you won't get 30-year warranty on your fence. Obviously, there are different products, but still. So I think that this is what I think is I am very optimistic.
Can we talk about, because obviously solar is best during the day, it's best during the summer. So is it the batteries, do they need to get a lot better? And can they store it for 12 hours? Can they store it in the winter when you're really not getting much sunshine at all, especially up here in the UK?
You have a point here, and I think that there is no single solution. I think there will just be so much solar. So even if we probably will, often when you talk about energy and predictions and so on, like there is so many, everyone believes their own thing, and everyone like have their own perception of how they want the world to be, and some are pro that and negative of that, and etc. I think there will obviously be a mix of many different things. I think that we will most likely have still fossil fuel, or maybe we will have hydrogen that replaces fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Because we would always need to have that backup power. So I believe that maybe a coal power plant doesn't need to be that bad if it runs maybe a couple of hours per year. But those hours per year was what we needed to actually not get a blackout. Then I would argue maybe it's not a big of a deal. But yes, during winter in the Nordics, battery as it is today would be really large and super expensive to actually be able to operate. So we need other forms of power. But we do have, in the Nordic countries, we have a lot of hydro and also nuclear. And
But so talk me through, because I feel like maybe 2 years ago, you could have looked at energy consumption and said, okay, maybe in 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to be there with the technology improvements on solar and maybe a bit of nuclear. Now that AI has sort of entered the fold over the last 2 years, the feeling is that maybe energy consumption could increase. I mean, I'm sort of spitballing here, but maybe 100x or something, because they're just very energy hungry. So does that change anything? And yeah, what's that going to mean for the energy
Yeah,
markets?
I think it actually. I think I made a Twitter thread about this just a week ago or so. But I'm actually pro. I would say we are using more and more power for AI. So we need more data centers to run these AI models and so. And then the first instinct could be that, well, it's not good. We should save energy and we should it's not good. It's carbon dioxide and so. But data centers are usually the consumers that are willing to pay a premium for renewables. So they want to brand themselves as that. And also the price of energy compared to the price of the GPUs and the data center itself is minuscule. Like they have still good profit margins, and the actual capital needed for the compute is much bigger than like the energy. So I think that there are reasonings behind this, and also something that I could probably share in the show notes, that if we get more data centers, that is also something that is pushing the renewables even faster ahead.
Yeah.
And so, and also you have a controllable resource. So everything that is controllable, which a data center is, at least if you let it to be controllable, is good for the grid. So you can actually eat up a little bit of that natural variability you get from renewables. There might not be too much wind all the time, might not be solar all the time, could be a cloud or something that goes. So you always have these fluctuations. And having controllable resources in the grid is actually a good thing in that sense. So it's a good mix. And then I think batteries, I think that we might be surprised. I mean, things are happening at a high pace. And if we just continue pushing batteries and solar, not as everything in the world, there is like no single solution for everything. But if there is anything that is going to change the landscape in a disruptive way, and we will see it fast, I believe it will be solar and batteries. Because they are good enough as it is. Like we don't need to search for the double efficiency of solar panels or the double efficiency of batteries. They are good enough today. Yeah. And if we just keep pushing, they will be cheaper of economies of scale. And that's the cool thing. I think we're past that threshold when we actually see things happening quite.
I mean, you'll know better than me, but I thought part of the problem with batteries was the materials that you need in order to mine and to produce them. So are there also any advancements on that front, or is it a case of it's going to be good for the environment once they're built, but to build them is, could be
there is loads of resources going into, like, that's always been the case. Like you could argue like an electric car, like if you're going to build an electric car, you need this amount of resources, and you produce this amount of carbon dioxide in the process because it's made in China and they have coal power, etc. So you could like drive around in your fossil fueled car for X amount of kilometers or miles. So I think we've all heard that kind of reasoning before. I think, like as everything, some parts it's like it's not false, but it's still not true. Like we need to change things. So I think that we just need to push things. In the beginning, it might actually be a little bit worse because it will be better in the end. I think the same thing with the current state of batteries and such. It has proven so far that no problem with like material for batteries. We are able to just produce them, and they are getting better. So I think in the new, I'm not a battery expert, by the way, but like in the new LFP batteries,
in this conversation,
you have no cobalt. Yeah, but there is no or like anything related to this rare air, like cobalt, which is like child labor in Africa, etc. Like you see this. So as you start the manufacturing process and you start to scale it up, just the economy of scale and the production will make it more effective. It's just how it's going to work. And I think there are examples of this from totally different sectors. But when you, like an aluminum can, when they were starting to be produced 30, 40 years ago, until they are now like a small fraction of, they are so much more effective in the manufacturing, and the amount of aluminium that goes into each and every can is much, much smaller than it was in the beginning. Still, they are able to do the same thing. They can, you can drink a soda. So I think that will be the case also for batteries. Even though it might not be the best technology, sometimes it doesn't matter.
And I think maybe just looking like way, way ahead, but I've been thinking a lot about AI and what it's going to mean for us if it reaches sort of super intelligence in the next 5 years, as people are saying, what that's going to mean for humans and how they're working and what they're actually doing with their lives, because AI can just sort of replace the intelligence of humans. And then it maybe gets down to the main things that we can help produce are things like energy and, the chips, which are going to go into AI. So do you sort of see that there is this potential future where energy has almost become more than just a physical product? It's become a digital commodity, and tokens, just like, I think it's called Energy, the token that you're going to be releasing. These could become sort of digital currencies almost in this future post-superintelligence AI world. I mean, how are you seeing all of that untangling, and what do you think the role of energy production, I suppose, for humans is going to be?
Yeah, this is a very interesting, like philosophical way of looking into the future. Like, I think that just from like what happens with us as a humankind when we get to this super intelligence and all this about energy, but still, isn't everything already all about energy? Like, if you look at these charts of countries and GDP. So if you compare GDPs in different countries and living standards, and like and if you put that on the same graph as how much energy is used per capita, you have a total linear correlation. So the more rich your country is, the more energy you use. So in some sense, we are already, as humans, linked to energy. Like, more energy, better life as human. That's like this I would say the high level scenario. How this would play out, yes, if we tokenize this, I think that would probably be a prerequisite for being able to trade and use this in a digital economy. As it is now, a lot of things aren't digital. Like, I think there are loads of countries in the world where they have manual readings of utility meters, as they had in the 70s or 80s in Sweden. I think we've had them connected for quite some time. But if we are able to connect and, I would say, reward and use it in real time, and in real time it has to be, just because what I told you earlier, like you can't like everything else is just a reconstruction afterwards. But it first level engineering, it needs to be real time. So I think, and then you might think, like, what's the best way of doing this? There isn't a world currency for energy that the energy companies are using now. They are using fiat money, and they are having their own transaction ledgers with customers, and then there are electricity markets in national, in regions, and so on. They trade between countries. But having a token or I would say an open transaction ledger of some kind that is linked to the energy use, that would most likely be something that is very, very useful for making the whole system better. And when I speak about this, I think that, we will be a part of it, and I'm sure there are already other projects and other tokens and so that are linked to energy. I just believe that we will see loads more. It would be very strange if not, because energy is like one of the prerequisites for having a modern society. We need to electrify everything, and it would be very strange if we don't tokenize the way we're actually doing the transactions of this currency, which we actually base our modern society on. So, but anyhow, just to go back, we at Sourceful, I don't think that we aim to be like the energy token of the world. That's not our aim. We want to be the coordination layer of the world. So we will have to be interacting with other systems as well, I believe. And that's also part of the story. There are other DePIN projects out there in the energy space, even though there are not too many at the moment. I believe there will most likely be more. I would also be surprised if there aren't more coming, because there are different problems in the energy sector that you could probably do with like tokenization. From the trading perspective, that's for sure one aspect of it. But we are different. If you're going to sort of see what we are doing different, is that, we believe if you are going to build a virtual power plant, that's what we base our thesis on. You need to be able to control, and you need to be able to do it in real time or near real time. So you need to do it less than a second. And if you're going to do that, it will be hard for you to build a network or a protocol when you're relying on third-party APIs from Chinese manufacturers. So we need a gateway. It needs to actually be some kind of hardware that is linked to the physical resources in people's home, very near the decentralized resource. This is a harder route to take. So if you're an energy DePIN that is collecting data, and that's what you want to do, which is a legit way of, like, you could monetize on renewable energy certificates and such, then you might not need the gateway, because it would just be cheaper to monetize the data using an API. And that we see at a couple of other projects that they're doing so. But we are doing what is a little bit harder, I would say, like from the growth perspective. Hardware is hard.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but I mean, it has been proven time and time again that this DePIN model, it does seem to be a very, very effective way to solve that, at least the hardware distribution problem, maybe not the hardware creation problem, albeit you can open source it as Helium have done, and allow other manufacturers to come in and try and produce the
We are
themselves.
going that route as well. So
nice.
We are. So the firmware is open source. We are now running it as a dual miner on Helium hotspots as well. Not all manufacturers, only Rock Wireless. That we need to start somewhere. But in theory, we could do it on any, but we need a little bit support from the manufacturer as well. So.
Well, I mean, we've covered a load here, and actually I've loved this episode because my former role was working at a data center company. I think energy is it's a subtly, like, very, very interesting thing to ponder about and think about the future of. So I've really enjoyed this episode. I think final question, what can we look forward to from Sourceful? What are the sort of next steps in your guys' roadmap?
I think the next step for us is, at this moment, we're all about growth. We need to put these numbers on the Explorer. So we are now opening up for API. And I think one of the interesting parts, which we are at the moment we're unique in that part, is that we are using both APIs, and we're going to connect utility meters as well, as the verification for the DER that you have in your home. So in order to sort of scale and still have a verifiable source of production, like, you shouldn't be able to game the system. We need to make that in a way that we can, like, without having installers and distributors that actually visit people's homes and sign a paper. We need to do that in another way. So that is what we're working very hard on now. Hopefully we'll have, it's hard to say, but like thousands of units connected before the end of the year. I hope I'll be able to achieve that. So.
Love it. Well, I'll definitely check it out, because based in the UK from next week. So hopefully I can get my solar panel on board, and really excited for what you guys are doing, and hopefully to see this energy sector of the DePIN vertical really expand over the next couple of years. Because I, as I said at the top of the show, I do think it's somewhat underserved, or maybe overlooked perhaps on the Twitter timeline. So yeah, it's a really exciting area, and it was great to sort of get into it with you today and hear more about Sourceful.
Yeah, and also we are doing a little bit of rebranding now. So maybe I just say that we have been Sourceful as SRCFUL. We are now rebranding to Sourceful as the full name. It's proven to be hard to people to understand. And you find us at sourceful.energy. So that's the rebranding that we're doing. Not to confuse anyone, we're still the same project. Yeah.
To be fair, that is good, because I saw someone describe you as, or maybe I heard them say Sourceful, and then I tried to search for it on Twitter, and it took me a while to find you guys. So yeah.
you see, it was needed. So good to hear.
Yeah. No, great. Well, hopefully we'll have you on at a later point once you're a bit more progressed with the project. But thanks once again for your time, Fredrik. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.